Welcome to episode 2 of ADHD Chatter, my podcast where I hope to speak to as many people as possible who are living with ADHD in an attempt to break apart the stigma and try and present a more balanced narrative around what it's like to live with ADHD. This week, I speak to a remarkable person called Josh White. Josh is the co-founder of a company called CanO Water. CanO Water is doing amazing things. It's trying to revolutionize the plastic water bottle industry by presenting an alternative, a aluminium canned water. And they're generating millions of pounds. They're in loads of supermarkets. Josh is in the Forbes 30 under 30, but he's also very open about his successes, and he's also very open about the struggles that he's had. And that was the parts of the conversation that I found really interesting. He is incredibly transparent about everything. I'll let the conversation speak for itself. If you are listening to this, could you do me a huge favor? If you're on YouTube, could you please subscribe? If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or anywhere else, if you could just find the follow button or leave a 5-star rating, whatever it is on any of those platforms, I'm not sure, that would be massively helpful. Thank you so much and enjoy the episode. Hello, Josh. Thank you so much for coming on to ADHD Chatter. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I think we've got a fair bit in common. We've both gone down the entrepreneurial route. We both had various personal successes and personal struggles as well. And of course, we both got ADHD. So I think I was really looking forward to seeing what else we have in common. I really wanted to start with an interesting question, and it's the one I've been asking myself, is based on sort of what you know about ADHD now, what would you say is your earliest experience or memory of you displaying traits of ADHD?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Alex. Very excited to be on the podcast. Do you know what? I'm an early adopter of ADHD. So I got diagnosed when I was about 11 years old, but I could go back to probably when I was sort of 3 or 4 and recognizing that I was different. I was always needing more. I think that was like my first sign of ADHD, and also sort of always wanting attention. I think that's something that is something that I noticed at a very, very young age. I was always screaming louder, and that class clown mentality that I had when I was at school always sort of showed up in my early life. You know, it's one of those, that classic thing. If someone jumped down the stairs like 5 steps, I would need to jump 10. So it's like I've always noticed that I was very different to my peers from a very young age. Yeah,
I suppose the traits or the sort of stereotype of ADHD is there. It kind of sounds like you had perhaps some of the obvious signs of it. You had the hyperactivity. You said you wanted to be like the class clown. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Always wanted to be there. I was always like the naughty one at school.
It's so interesting because I'm the opposite. I never displayed any of those. I was always like quite internalized and often a bit of a daydreamer, and I was never really what you're talking about, how you just presented with it, I suppose. So it's interesting to see how it shows up in various people. And what would your school reports look like?
Terrible. I mean, it's funny. I was always quite wild. My parents told me that when I was younger, all the kids would just sort of be playing happily, and they once on a family holiday when I was probably about 7 or 8, they had to block me in with sunbeds because I was just trying to run around all over the place. I've always been sort of very hyper, very sort of noticeably different, and I think school was extremely tough for me. I had severe anxiety from a very young age. I wasn't happy. I would, my ADHD, I'd be really, really erratic and mental. And then like an hour later, I would have like a terrible sort of come down type of feeling of like being very sort of low and sad and fearful. But I think that, one of the things that I noticed is that I try to, I wouldn't say I tried to hide it, but I tried to hide my vulnerability. So I always wanted people to see this crazy side of me, because I never wanted anyone to sort of see the true side, which was actually a very scared little boy who was had a lot of internal issues, and a lot of it stemmed from fear. So my school reports were always very nice kid, got a great heart. I was never like a bad, horrible person, but I was just very wild, and I wanted everyone to laugh at me and find me funny. And I also wanted everyone to be my friend. I think that a lot of these things were big things for me with ADHD, is that I had this front. I was wearing this mask, but behind it wasn't great. It was actually quite it was quite sad actually when I look back at my sort of my early, I would say, anything from sort of 10 to 15 was quite tough for me.
You mentioned masking, and that's a really interesting thing I'm trying to get my head around still. And do you think that when you were going through those periods of sort of trying to project a different version of how you felt inside, it was a massive conscious effort to act in a different way? Or did you find it sort of came naturally depending on the situations you were in?
Yeah, I think that it is funny actually, because I think I'm really good at this now. I'm very good at sort of being, like in different areas of life, I can adapt quite well. And I think that's something that I always was a negative in my early ADHD world, but it's a positive now in my business sort of entrepreneurial journey, where I can adapt in different sort of situations. And I think that's something to point out, is that when I first got diagnosed with ADHD when I was 11, it was all just negative. Everything was negative, negative, negative. Whereas now I've learned obviously how to do, how to adapt to it and bring a bit more of a positive light into situations. But if I look at my early childhood, that masking, it was hard, because I knew me as the person, I knew that it wasn't real. I knew that I would have to put on this front all day, and then I'd come home and I'd be sitting in my own thoughts and my own, self and isolation. And it was, that was a horrible time for me at that age. I actually hated being by myself. And I think that my ADHD really projected that. In all honesty, I always needed to be around people. That was a lot. That was down to my insecurities, which I definitely think that my ADHD enhanced. It sort of made my brain work in so many different ways with thoughts. I think that that's something that I learned at a very young age, is that I'd look around the room and people would just be dealing with the now, but I would be dealing with the past, the present, and the future all at once. And that's something that has very much been part of my journey of how do I just live in now, right now, and not project into the future or sort of worry about what's happened in the past.
It's amazing advice, and I think I heard you say similar on the quarter life crisis, where you were talking about how to avoid. I think you were talking about how to avoid burnout and overwhelm, and it's the advice to essentially try and just live in the day and don't think too much about a big future goal. Just try and break it down and do it sort of day by day, and that's that was the key takeaway I took away from that interview. When you were younger, because I'm trying to learn as much as I can about ADHD in a very short period of time and see the relatabilities between sort of my own experience and others. Did you were you very sensitive to rejection as a child? And I mean, I'll talk about the childhood, but were you sensitive to rejection when you were growing up, and are you still now, would you say?
Enormously. I mean, it's literally the story of my life. You know, the smallest things can really affect me, you know, and to normal people they just get on with it. But I can get very sensitive over the smallest things, and even things that I might perceive as rejection, but aren't to the everyday person. I think that as a kid, I would never put myself in situations because I was so scared of the rejection. So I think that I would just hide from it. And if I thought that there was if rejection had a part to play in any scenario, I would hide from it as hard as I could. So I think that that's something that is actually very interesting, because I'm a big people watcher. You know, I like watching people. I like learning from others, and you know, I've got a lot of friends, and I look at them in certain situations, and it baffles me sometimes how people can just be rejected or spoken to in a certain way, and just literally just get over it like that. Whereas for myself, it's a process. I definitely think I've got a lot better at it. It's funny, I'm severely colorblind, and I have been my whole life. And I've just learned how to deal with it, you know. So I might look at a color and I might know that that it isn't what I perceive it as, or what you might see it as, but I've sort of learnt my way around it. And it's very similar with ADHD. I think when something happens, or when something used to happen, I would just jump at it. So I would get either really angry or really sad, and I would just go from 0 to 100 real quick. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the anger iceberg, but you know, you can go from here to here so quick, but what's underneath it? And there's all these fear, rejection, anger, and all these things underneath it. So what I'm much better at today in a scenario is looking at that iceberg of, instead of going all the way up to the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, how do I look at what's actually sort of generating these feelings? And I'm a lot better. So in scenarios now, I actually will take a few seconds, I'll pause, and I will think, is this just me and my ADHD, or am I feeling fearful or this? And what are the underlying defects of character that I'm aligning these to, and that are making me feel this certain way? So yeah, rejection is a really good one that you mentioned, actually, because it's been a huge part of my experience of dealing with something that ultimately can lead me into a really fearful place.
It's like I'm listening to myself, and every time I have these conversations, I sort of get that experience. And that's another thing. I'm colorblind as well. I'm just on an off topic, so that was the list of what we have in common is growing. And it's so true. I look back in my past, and I see situations, and I can think way back when I was in sort of preschool, and you know, a teacher telling me off, or the sort of sense of injustice and the internalized rage, and you just go into a corner and isolate yourself until you calm down. And now I'm, like you said, you've got that self-awareness as you get a little bit older. But when you look back, you can sort of see when you didn't have that self-awareness, or I can, that can really, if it's not understood, can cause big problems in relationships, at work, just general day to day. Because actually, if someone gives you a criticism or says something that isn't amazingly positive, it's quite often with good intention. But
Definitely.
I take it, and it sounds like you take it as a dagger to the heart, and it can really knock you off for the whole day or even the week. But yeah, what you said is really useful for me, and hopefully others, to really have that iceberg, and to say, and to really step back. And when you're in the moment, it's easier said than done to not get that feeling of injustice and internalized rage, or I don't know if you feel the same, but that's kind of what I get, and it can really knock me off. But actually knowing that self-awareness, and then going, is this something to do with my character defect, which is how I respond to criticism, which actually might be just in this instance, or is this person genuinely being nasty? And more often than not, it's the first one.
Of course.
Yeah, man, super relatable. And then you've obviously gone into business, which is so impressive. And I see it often with the people I'm speaking to on this podcast, and just generally in the neurodivergent spaces, people are drawn towards the entrepreneurial endeavor, and you've done that as well. What would you think is the traits, the character traits, the positives that have A, drawn you to that lifestyle, and B, assisted you in it?
Yeah, it's funny because as a kid, if you had sort of said to someone that I would be spoken in the same sentence as the words, entrepreneur, business owner, founder, I think that people would never have believed it. It's quite funny. I have never gone down the conventional route of anything in my life, ever. I've always wanted different things to what other people have wanted. I've always been a little bit more creative in the sense of, doing my own thing. Sometimes people think I'm crazy and wacky in certain aspects, and I think that when I left school, everyone went into, becoming, going on their business journey, whether that be in like property or recruitment or banking or, their university, degree, that type of lifestyle. Whereas I went into DJing, I think that it was a little bit of it was quite embarrassing, but at the same time, I really liked it. Embarrassing from the perspective of, I thought that, at the time, what would people think of me? But I'm doing this because this is what I love. And one of my things with ADHD, and I've always had this issue, and it's something that, most people with ADHD can probably relate with, is the concentration. I find it extremely hard to concentrate when doing things that I don't enjoy. So in class, if it was like an English class or a history class, I would just turn off. It wasn't that I wanted to turn off. It was that I physically couldn't concentrate because it just wasn't interesting me. But if I was in art, which I was obsessed with, I would be 100% there, listening, hyper focusing in on it. So art and music were my thing, and I went on to do a degree in sculpture and was very into art. But then, like most people with ADHD, that didn't last. And then I wanted to become a music producer, and then that didn't last. And most of my journey was starting, stopping. But at 19, I started an events business and became completely and utterly obsessed with doing something that I enjoyed around like building a brand and speaking to people. And I think that was the first time ever that I had this like obsessive obsessive nature of trying to make something work. And I had it with DJing as well. Like when I DJ to a crowd, like let's just say of like 1,000, 10,000 people, the feeling that I get is like you're on a high like no other. And I think that it's like a dopamine high that you're always chasing. But it's a positive one. That's the thing about these things is it's a positive dopamine high. And you look up and you look around and you see that people are there for you. So I think that was my first experience of wanting to be something and be great. And I've always been obsessed with trying to do good and be better, whether that's helping people or sort of raising awareness, whether it be ADHD, addiction, all these other types of things. So I think that as a founder, I naturally gravitated to it because I wanted to have my mark. I wanted to like sort of have my print on something, and it doesn't working for someone, which I've done before. I don't have that excitement that I do for like my own baby and growing it myself. It's something that's ingrained in me to feel proud and to concentrate 100% of my efforts on something that I started myself. And I think that's where, that's where a real positive comes into place, because it's this hyper-focused mentality that we have with ADHD, where we become completely obsessed with trying to make something work. And also, one thing I will actually say as well is that we're so used to, as people with ADHD, as being looked at as people that have an illness, that have a disease, or that aren't that aren't great, etc. Oh, for me at 11, it was always all the teachers like, you've got ADHD, you've got ADHD. It was always something that they always put it towards. Oh, it's all right, you've got ADHD. So I think that one of my hyper focuses, it has always been proving that I can do it, which is actually something that helped in the early days of starting CanO Water, because I wouldn't take no as an answer.
Yeah, 100%. And I can see the when you said you completely zone out and just find it impossible to do something that you're not interested in, and I know that is a common, just a human trait, but I think with people with ADHD, it's really extreme. Like, it's not a case of we just don't want to do it, we can't do it because we're not interested in it. And it's like if a kid isn't good at maths, for example, don't pay extra money to give him extra math lessons. It's don't try and fit a square peg into a round hole. And you talk about your DJing, the thing that you found that gives you that huge rush. For me, it was social media. For you, it was DJing. For some people, it's art. It could be racing, driving. But there's a trend that I've noticed with people with ADHD, that they stumble across something and it kind of unlocks this passion. And sometimes that's the thing that they stick at and become world class at it. I think I was speaking to a chap called Matt Gutwell, and he had a really interesting theory, because he, like yourself and I, have had our history of we've had a up and down relationship with alcohol in the past, and his theory was that we get such an intense flood of dopamine with the thing that we find. For me, it was social media. For you, it was DJing and now other things. And when we step away from that thing, we're in this space where we're so unfulfilled and bored of the world, when we're not in that hyperfocus and that obsession of whatever it is that makes our brain fire up. So we turn, if we're not careful, we can turn to alcohol, or we can turn to binge eating, or we can turn to other things that give us an unhealthy rush of dopamine. I mean, if you've been through that journey, right? Like as I have in the past with realizing the relationship with alcohol is a troublesome one for us.
Yeah, definitely. So it's funny you say that, because I had I have been in recovery for the past 17 years. And when I was, from the age of 12 to 15, I developed quite a bad alcohol addiction. That usually, doesn't happen that young, but for myself it did. And by 15, I had gone into a rehabilitation centre, and I started to work the 12 steps and attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And one of the things that I did in rehab that was incredibly powerful is an exercise about the consequences of my addiction. And one of the things that I remember doing was talking about how when I stopped DJing, because I started DJing at the age of 10 years old, it was something that I was completely obsessed with from a young age. But when I stopped DJing, my alcohol use got quite severe. DJing has always been, and after it's actually been the DJing and CanO as well have actually been two things that have kept me, in a really, really good place. Having a hobby is something that I think is incredibly powerful and incredibly important especially one that is, that sort of stimulates your mind and gets you excited and helps you with that sort of that dopamine hit. I mean, I could literally just be listening to a new song and just feel in another world. But my addiction was, ADHD and addiction are incredibly close to each other. I have many friends within Alcoholics Anonymous who are, who have ADHD. It's something that is very, very close. I think that similar to ADHD, we crave that dopamine. It's the exact same thing with addiction. It's like you need something. For me today, it is work and gym, and maybe a few holidays with my fiance, here and there that sort of that get me into that mode. But in my early years, it was very much, it was alcohol, and it wasn't just. And this is where ADHD isn't good with addiction, because mixing a wild child with alcohol, is not a good combination. So it was really, really painful for me when I was younger, because I didn't know why I was doing the things that I did. That's the truth. I didn't understand why, and I was on medication at the time for ADHD, and I was drinking on the medication, which isn't, is not very good to do. And it was just a combination of terribleness, basically, if that's even a word. And I think that in essence caused terrible grief, and I ended up in a bad place. But I actually look back now and think that was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because getting clean at such a young age, especially when I attend AA and see many people that are dealing with it now in their their 40s, 50s or beyond. I'm very, very fortunate that I could get clean at the age of 15, and work an incredible program that actually helps your mind as well, which within ADHD we all know our minds can be frazzled and all over the place. So I definitely think there's a link there. I think there's a link, and I don't know if there's been any studies, but the more time that I spent with people in recovery, the more I hear that ADHD and addiction are work alongside each other.
Thanks for being so open. I mean, I can see a link, even if it's just a observational one. Like yourself, I've been to AA meetings and done the 12-step program, and it's a common thing that gets mentioned. ADHD. I mean, not everyone obviously who has ADHD is going to have a drinking problem, but there seems to be a lot of people who have a drinking problem that have ADHD. I think we feel things like a lot stronger than most people. I think we feel the happiness, we feel the creativity a lot stronger, we feel the sadness, we feel the boredom a lot stronger. We everything is too extreme with us. We can be hugely creative, we can be hugely energetic, hugely good at a ton of things, but then it can swing back the other way if we're not careful. And I think as we get a bit older, we get that awareness to spot the moments where it's swinging the other way. I was a little bit later than you. I was in my sort of 26, 27 when I realized that I had a problematic relationship with alcohol, and funnily enough, it was when I had my social media business taken away from me, and I had to fight in the courts to get it back. And so it's kind of goes along with that theory. If I had that dopamine tap taken away from me, like you had the DJing stopped, and you suddenly had to sort of find it elsewhere. And you're not the only person who I've spoken to who said similar. So I'm really seeing this trend where we've found this thing that's given us huge enjoyment, huge dopamine on tap. We stop it, or it gets taken away, and then we go to alternative sources. It's super interesting. The more I learn about these ideas and why we do things in certain ways. I mean, your business now, CanO Water, is is really impressive. And you're one of the co-founders.
Yes.
And are you like what would you say your sort of day-to-day role in the business is?
So my role currently is marketing director and co-founder.
Okay, so you're a creative mind. Do you come with like the marketing campaigns? Do you enjoy thinking of the fun ideas that are gonna make the business look good and sort of go viral?
Yeah, for sure. So, whether it be sort of creative ideas, execution, working with the team on planning, I get very excited about new and innovative ideas, things that, people might have not done. And that comes from a lot of sort of brainstorming sessions. We've just brought on some agencies to sort of help take that to the next level, which, I find, especially, on the topic of ADHD and brainstorming and bouncing off of other people. I think that's something that I absolutely love. I love being in a room with people, visual learning, sort of like talking and coming up with different creative ideas. I think that's something that I get very excited about, with my team for sure. But then, just like sort of like founder duties as well. So like raising awareness of why aluminium is better than plastic. CanO Water isn't your conventional brand. We've been drinking out of plastic bottles for the past 30, 40 years. And I just love, I love educating people and talking to people about why aluminium is better, why it's infinitely recyclable. It gives me a buzz. It's funny, I could stand in the street for 10 hours just talking to people about CanO. Most people would find it daunting or absolutely hate that. But I love just, I love just sort of talking to people and explaining people. And that's something that, I've sort of seen in the past sort of 3-4 years is a big strength of mine. Is just sort of raising awareness and building the brand from nothing to something. I think that it's, it won't always be me who's sitting in this seat, because there's definitely better people out there who, from a marketing perspective, have got some greater tools than I do. But I think that what I have really enjoyed, especially from a founder piece, is just being part of this movement and going up against the big powerful brands who don't necessarily give you the honest, the most honest answers to the questions.
It's so interesting, and I think the strengths you mentioned there are so powerful and so valuable to a business. You sort of bring a new way of thinking to the table, and a topic that I think I don't know if you've spoken about it before, but the idea of having amazing intuition and being able to be aware if someone's not being genuine and picking up on someone's, I suppose, true colours. I saw I think a meme on Instagram the other day, and it was from a ADHD influencer, and they said, I'm able to know who the killer is in the first episode of a new series I'm watching, and it annoys my partner. And loads of likes and loads of comments, and lots of people say, yeah, that's I know when someone's a wrong-un before I see their mugshot on the news, for example. That intuition that I related with, and is that I can see that being a massive strength in both personal and professional life. It's almost like a defense mechanism. You're aware of danger because you've got this heightened sense of awareness, and maybe you just pick up on like body movements or micro movements or facial expressions a little bit more accurately than some people do. Is that something you can relate with at all?
Yeah, massively. I mean, you sort of just answered the question, but very, very well, because it's basically what I was going to say. I think that because we hyper focus on things, we notice things a lot better than others. I have always thought that I am a very good sort of judge of character, and I've sort of been right in loads of scenarios. Listen, I'm not always right, and I'm not perfect, and I'm no angel either. But it's definitely something that has worked both inside business and outside of business, where I've used my intuition on certain, on certain things, and I've been right. Mainly because, as you just said, we spot things, the things that a lot of people don't usually look for because they're not focusing on it. We are always focusing on it, and I mentioned before, I'm a people watcher. I'm always watching people. Part of my role at CanO Water as well within brand and marketing is obviously making sure that, that we know our audience, we know, people. So when we do sampling sessions, I'll regularly watch the people that take cans, and I'll see how they react. And I will sort of, even as a DJ as well, I remember if I'm DJing to 1,000 people, one of my biggest strengths is I look into the crowd and I instantly know what that crowd wants just by watching their body language, even from like the clothes that they're wearing and like these small little things. I straight away can be like, all right, I know the type of crowd that this is. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, I get it right. Because it's just, it's about this sort of like, I will just drum in on this on the smallest little things and be like, okay, I get it. I know what that is. I know what that wants, and so it is definitely a strength. And I've always thought about it, but you spoke about it in a really, really good way and articulated it very well. But it's definitely something that, and it's funny because there's so many traits within ADHD. It's not just like one thing. There's so many, and only recently have I started to be a lot more grateful to have ADHD because of social media. And this is where social media, I think, is really, really positive, because there's quite a few negatives, but from a positive standpoint, I think the education piece is massive. You've got so many ADHD pages where there's insights on things that you're always going to have that moment of, oh my God, I do that. And I never knew that was an ADHD trait. And I think that's so powerful, because the most horrible thing about having any form of illness or mental health, issue is with anything in life is the not knowing. And I think that's the scariest part. Like, there are certain things that I'll do sometimes where I'll be having a conversation and I'll forget a word, and I genuinely cannot remember what the word is of something. And it's really affected me, because I'll be in really high quality, really big business meetings, and I'll just be talking and I'll just forget. I'll know what the meaning of the word is, but I won't remember the actual word. And I read recently that is also a trait of ADHD. So I think that, you learn so many of these things. And I think that's what's so powerful, is that when you've learned it, and you're aware of it, you then can start to sort of play on it and remember, oh, okay, that's a very nice thing to sort of to have, is when you're in the know of why you do something. It's horrible to not be in the know.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And I think what you were describing there is essentially what I think the medical community call working memory. And yeah, it can be quite bad with people with ADHD, but it's one of those things that once you understand and you're aware that is slightly a pitfall that you might experience, and there's things you can put in place to help navigate around it. I can walk into a room sometimes and forget why I walked in, or like you said, be mid-sentence in a meeting and I forget a word that I use every day of my life, and then it comes back to me later. And yeah, it's a real thing. Like, and it's people with ADHD do struggle with working memory. For example, it's quite normal to go into a supermarket and know that you've got to buy 15 or 10 bits of ingredients to make a curry. Whereas if I go into a supermarket, unless I've got a list in front of me that is really clear, I'm not going to know what those 10 things are. The amount of times I walked into a supermarket and just gone, what am I doing here? And you just get completely overwhelmed and you end up buying a ready meal or going back and ordering a takeaway.
Yeah, that's
But,
it.
it's just one of those things. And you've got to, once you get the self-awareness, you can sort of laugh at those situations, because with situations like that, on the flip side, there's amazing positives. Going back to the intuition thing, 7%, I think it's 7% of communication is verbal. And I think we're really, really good at picking up on the 93% that isn't spoken. Like I mentioned, the micro body movements, tone of voice, body posture, facial expressions, all these things that, as you said earlier, it's not often people pay attention to, and people just take the spoken word as face value. Whereas for me, it's been a massive defense mechanism, and it served me really well in my personal life and business life. I'll have a conversation with someone, and then I'll go, "Oh, you're not genuine there," or you've got an agenda here, or you're trying to do something bad to me, or all this kind of stuff. And it's really fascinating. Just to end with, I suppose, and it's a topic that I'm fascinated by. And you said earlier you're getting married soon, which, congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
ADHD and relationships. It's a huge topic. You could probably do a whole episode on it. Massive strengths and probably a few weaknesses in maintaining a relationship. How has it played a fact, do you think, in your relationships in the past, or how has it been a positive in your current relationship?
Yeah, I think, do you know what? I think in my current relationship, and I always say this to my fiance, she has the best version of me. I think that, I've always been a relationship person, and I've learned a lot about myself, and I think that's incredibly important, to anyone listening, is that, what I would notice as I would go from one relationship and then to the other, and some of the issues from that relationship might carry into the next one. And it's incredibly important that when your partner turns around and says that you're acting a certain way, it's very important to remember, if it's happened in the past, that it's probably a you thing, and that it isn't a them thing. It probably is something that you need to look at. So, I've worked for many, many years on myself. And if you sort of look at it a bit like a garden, if the garden is messy and all the weeds are not great, and you haven't watered your plants and everything's just looks terrible, and if someone's going to walk into the garden and say, "This is disgusting, you need to sort it out," I've definitely been watering the plants for, the good part of 10 to 12 years. So as a person today, I've definitely blossomed, and my garden's looking a lot prettier than it did. But if I don't work on myself, and if I don't remember all the sort of the negative traits, and don't sort of consider myself as perfect, what will happen is that those weeds will come back. And I think that's it. I look at it the whole time. I just water my plants as much as I can. And if my fiance says to me, "You're acting in a certain way," I will try my absolute best today to look at myself and correct it. Otherwise, I will just go back into old behaviour. And I think that's saying it that I've learned about growth is, you can't really grow if you're not willing to sort of work on yourself and work on the things that, that are holding you back. So I definitely think that ADHD in my in a lot of my relationships have held me back enormously, and it's quite funny. I look back, and I've got good relationships with my past my past partners as friends. There's no sort of there's no issues in this. I've always sort of tried to make sure that that there's no sort of broken bridges, and I think that that's incredibly important to me, because I'm not perfect by any means, but I've definitely worked on myself, and I'm able to be the best version of me today. But it is very hard. It's very hard, ADHD in relationships, and I think that anyone that's sort of listening, I think that, you know, just by doing a Google search, you can probably find some really sort of good information out there that can help you if you're in a relationship and you're doing certain things, that you can sort of be like, okay, this is, you know, this is me, and, you know, you can explain to your partner and show them that if you do certain things, maybe there's a way around it, a way they can maybe help you as well. But yeah, it's listen, even in my relationship today, you know, I'm not perfect. I'm still, you know, I'll leave clothes on the floor and completely forget that they're on the floor. You know, it's those types of things that are typical addiction. I keep saying it, typical ADHD traits that you know, I always try my absolute hardest to sort of get over those hurdles and just remember that, because you can sometimes punish yourself, can't you? Like, you can say like, fuck, why have I done this again and again and again? But I think just accepting it and correcting it is the way forward.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And everything you just said is so accurate, and goes back, I suppose, to that point of having the self-awareness based on previous experiences. You can easily think back maybe to one of your first relationships and before maybe you had the understanding of rejection sensitive dysphoria, for example, or you know, if you're hyper focused, so you might be ignoring your partner, and all these things can cause conflict and arguments if they're just taken on face value without the understanding of ADHD and the context of ADHD. And again, like you said earlier, I suppose, going back to that iceberg, and if your partner says the tiniest thing which you perceive as a criticism, and you know, maybe there's a drink involved as well, or maybe there isn't, or maybe you can really lash out, and a huge argument can happen. But when you have that understanding and the context of ADHD, again, like you said, you can step back and create much healthier relationships with that context. I think that's everything, Josh. I think it's been really, really interesting to talk to you. I've learned again so much every time I speak to someone on this podcast. I come away with a better understanding and more context of how my brain works. And thank you for being so honest and open with your story. Is there anything else you wanted to mention or talk about, or if someone wanted to find you online, where could they go about to do that?
So grateful to be here. You know, it's a real breath of fresh air talking about, you know, something that is you know, perceived as a problem, and talking about, you know, the positives and the negatives about it. You know, that how amazing is it that we've got something that we all thought was really, really awful, but actually there are some real incredible benefits there, and positives. And I guess, yeah, if you want to find me, obviously Josh_White1 on Instagram. And I'm always very open if anyone has any questions regarding ADHD, and, you know, from a CanO Water perspective, you know, being a founder with ADHD can be very, very challenging. So if, you know, there's any questions there, then I'm always very happy to answer.
Brilliant. And yeah, just quick, I should have also said I was focusing on the negatives of the relationships a bit just then as well. I think dating with someone with ADHD is going to be really fun. It's going to be unpredictable. It's going to be very spontaneous. One day is not going to be the same for the other. Yeah, it's going to be a wild ride. But no, thank you, Josh, so much for being so honest and open. As I said, I think the listeners are going to gain a lot. And yeah, I'd love to have you on again in the future at some point, and we can catch up. Thank you so much, Josh. Much appreciated.
No, honestly, Alex, thank you very, very much. Really good to, obviously, I think what you're doing is great.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, the idea is to get a more balanced narrative around what it's like to live with ADHD. There's so much binary content on social media. It's either super amazing or it's super bad, and the reality is it's often just somewhere in the middle, you know. And I think, as you've said a number of times in this chat, it's as you get a little bit older, you get that self-awareness to to take advantage of the strengths and to try and avoid some of the pitfalls. And I think that it leans on us as our responsibility to share that knowledge to the younger generations. So hopefully avoid them falling in some of the pitfalls, and then they can take advantages of the strengths earlier on.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.